Hello and welcome again to RC Model Reviews, and today I'm looking at some more FPV. I'm looking at video transmitter receiver systems, and particularly I'm looking at the 5.8 gigahertz systems because that's what I use, and they really are probably the easiest to set up. There's a whole lot of benefits to 5.8 gigahertz over the other frequencies such as 900 megahertz, 1.2 gigahertz, 1.3 gigahertz, and so forth. I know a lot of people that do long-range stuff like to use 2.4 gigs. That's fine, because if you're using a long-range UHF radio system, you can use 2.4, but 2.4 doesn't usually get on that well if you're trying to use a 2.4 gig radio system as well. The radio system, especially a frequency hopper like this, will tend to stomp all over your video signal, so you'll get very poor results. So what I'm going to do today is just basically have a look at what you will be able to choose from if you decide to go the 5.8 gigahertz video way. I'll also have a little bit of a talk about power levels, about the different brands, antennas, and a whole lot of stuff like that. So if you're looking to get into FPV and you haven't decided what frequency you're going to use for your video gear, this is all about 5.8 gigahertz. And here is some of the bewildering array of video transmitters you can get on 5.8 gigahertz. Now, they basically fall into two camps. There's the Immersion or FatShark gear, which transmits on a range of frequencies or range of channels around the 5.8 gigahertz band. And then there is the other gear, which is sold by crowds like Foxtech High Model, Hobby King, and it's generally used as a SkyRF modules, or some modules that operate on a much wider range of frequency. They go from about 5.7 gigs to 5.9 gigs, so there's a much greater spread on these systems than on these ones. Generally speaking, if you want to fly multiple systems, like have 2 or 3 people flying at once, 3 people is about the maximum you can safely fly together, because even though they have different frequencies, the amount of overlap, or the sensitivity of the receivers that you use with these transmitters tends to be quite broad, so they will pick up adjacent channels, which means you can be very careful not to wipe out someone else. It's like the old days of 72 megs when you had to have a peg for your radio transmitter. Well, if you're going to be flying FPV in a crowd with other people who fly FPV, you might need to get some pegs to control who uses what channel. Nothing worse than flying your FPV model, being a long way away, and someone beside you turns on their FPV model and their transmitter's on the same frequency as yours, or a nearby frequency, and suddenly you lose your video. So that's one thing to really consider. But let's have a look, first of all, at these ones. I'll go through the range of options for you so you can see what you'd be getting for your money and the differences between them. This is the basic 200 milliwatt unit that you can get on the Foxtech, I'll call it SkyRF, on the SkyRF band. It's so simple, it's quite light, it's quite small. Comes with it one of these little rubber ducky aerials. This is a right angle one. These aerials are pretty crap, to be totally honest. If you pull them apart inside, all you find is a little length of wire and a little length of brass tube. That's all they are. They're what's called a sleeved dipole. They have about 2 decibels of gain. Now, you don't want a lot of gain on your transmitter, of course, because as I've shown in an earlier video, gain is obtained by changing the shape of the radiation pattern produced by the antenna. Now, with the bit that goes on your model, you want that to be as spherical as possible, because there's no way of telling which way your model is going to be oriented towards your receiver on the ground. So you want it to transmit an even signal in all directions. And so these don't do a bad job, but they're pretty crusty, and often they're not cut to the right length or tuned properly. So, yeah. And also they are what's called a linearly polarized antenna. Linearly polarized antenna just means that they send out a signal in a particular plane. If your antenna is like that, it sends it out in a vertical plane. If your antenna is laid down like that, it'll send it out in a horizontal plane. What does that mean? Well, for an antenna to work, it has to intersect the transmitted frequency. So this sends out a signal. The receiver antenna has to interrupt or intercept that signal to pick up what's being transmitted. So if we have here's a receiver. This is the matching receiver for that transmitter. So if we have the system set up like this, not a problem, because if we look at it like this, here we go, the antennas, the transmitter antenna here transmits vertically, and so it overlaps the receiver antenna. If I can line these up, you'll see what I mean. See, they overlap perfectly if you line them up this way, and that means that a lot of the energy from this transmitter is delivered to the receiver, so you get a good strong signal. But if your model starts to bank over, and if your model banks like that, look how much intersection there is. There's only a tiny little piece of intersection where the 2 antennas overlap, because this one's going this way and this one's going this way. That's called cross polarization. And what that basically means is if your model is banked over to say 45 degrees or more, like this, then you're going to lose a lot of signal strength because this receiver antenna is no longer lined up. It is not collecting the full amount of signal it could. In fact, the amazing thing is that if you have full cross-polarization, if your transmitter antenna is one way and your receiver antenna is the other way, you only get 1/100th the amount of signal. It reduces it by a factor of 100. That's an enormous amount. That's why everyone these days has gone to the clover-leaf antennas, the circularly polarized antennas. They don't have that problem. So also that's why people use diversity sometimes on these, with these black rubber ducky aerials, because you can have one receiver with an aerial that way and one receiver with it that way. So as the model changes its orientation, the receiver will switch to the best antenna, but you're still going to lose a lot of signal when the model's banked. So nah, these things, not so good. But at least on 5.8 gigahertz, they're quite small. Because if we were to go to a different frequency like 900 or 1.2, look at the size of the antennas you end up having to use on those. They are ridiculously long. Let's have a look at this. I'll lay these down. There you go. This is a 900 megahertz unit. Look at the size of that. This is a 5.8 gigahertz unit. Look at the size of that. And it actually gets quite stupid because somewhere around here I've got, here we go. Here it is a 900 megahertz transmitter. And look how much bigger than the transmitter. This is the transmitter. Look how much bigger the antenna is. It's enormous. Absolutely outrageously long. So, you know, putting this on something like an AXN or something would be, you know, very, very difficult because you've got all this huge antenna here. It's going to weigh you down, add extra drag. Even if you use the stock antennas, the 5.8 gig, much smaller, much lighter, much easier to mount somewhere. So there you go. But this was going to be a section on the transmitter type. So this is 200 milliwatts. That's 1/5 of a watt. It doesn't sound like a lot of power, but if you use the right antennas, then this transmitter will actually give you easily a couple of kilometers of range. That's 1 1/3 miles or 1 1/4 miles or something. That's quite a long way. That's beyond the line of sight. So most countries legally you're only allowed to go to the limits of visual range. So this will get you into trouble with the authorities if you fly beyond visual line of sight. So it's great fun. You know, this is all you need to get started. You don't need a whole lot of power to get started. And as I'll show you in a minute, power doesn't actually buy you much. But there you go. These are cheap as beans. You can buy them online. Usually come with a matching receiver like this one here. So if you buy these two, it's pretty straightforward. If a wire goes off to your battery, a wire goes off to your camera, done. And the receiver has little jacks in the bottom for plugging in your goggles or your LCD screen or whatever, and your power. Simple. That's a nice simple way to get started. Now, the module that's in here, hidden deep in the depths and the bowels of these things, is a little module, and it's actually the same module that I use in my FPV backpacks. This is an old prototype, so it doesn't look very flash, but hidden inside here there's one of those little modules. So this FPV backpack can use these receivers if you want it to. And but you notice with the FPV backpack, it has this different type of antenna. It's got the circularly polarized antenna, which is really great because what that means is if you're using a matching receiver antenna like this, then it doesn't matter what angle your model's on, it'll always get a good strong signal. That makes a big difference. So that's why everyone's switching to these things, because that's just so much better for FPV use. Again, you notice that from 5.8 gigahertz, these are tiny. For 900 megahertz or 1.2 gigs, they're bigger, huge things. More drag, more easily damaged, whatever. 5.8 gig, one of the big benefits, everything is smaller in terms of the antennas and so forth. But there we go. Now, if you want more power than 200 milliwatts, which personally I don't think you actually need, you can step up to something like, oh, here's one, something like this. This is, I think it's a 500 or 600 milliwatt. I'm not actually sure. I think it's 500 or 600. And it has a little fan on it. And it has a heat sink in there. Now, a lot of people have said, oh, these are terrible because all they are is one of these with a fan on it and they drive it too hard and these blow up. Well, actually, it's not true. I've looked inside. They have a different chipset. The chipset in here is different to the chipset in there. So it's not just a case of taking one of these and turbocharging it and hoping that the pistons don't disconnect from the conrods. No, these are a different chipset. And I know a lot of people have used these quite reliably for quite a long period of time without any failures at all. And they do add a useful amount of extra range. I mean, it's about 2.5, 3 times the power, but that won't give you 2.5 or 3 times the range by any stretch. In fact, it won't even give you, twice the range because power doesn't work that way, and I'll show you why shortly. But this is, of course, a lot bigger and heavier than this. So you're paying a penalty if you want to go up in power. Well, that was the case, but now they've brought out a 1 watt version. This is 1 watt, 5.8 gigahertz. And this one, again, has a little gold heat sink and a little fan on it, but it is smaller and lighter than the previous less powerful one. And I believe there's now actually a 400 milliwatt one, which sort of falls in between this one and this one. So you're spoilt for choice. There's a whole lot of options, and I'm going to test this one. This is the only one I haven't tested and reviewed yet. I'll be testing and reviewing this 1 watt one to see how it performs. But basically, this is 5 times more powerful than that. So you'd expect to get roughly twice the range. But twice the range for 5 times the power? How does that work? That's why I don't really think these things are worth paying a lot of extra money for, because you're much better to use the lower power and use better antennas than get lots of power and waste a whole lot of it in heat, which is why there's a fan, because these things get damn hot. Now, it's worth a mention at this stage, of course, the one critical thing with all this FPV gear, it doesn't matter what frequency it's on, never run your transmitter without an antenna. Because what happens is normally, take for example this, you get 1 watt supposedly of radio frequency energy created in here, and it comes out this antenna. So it's all soaked up by the antenna and turned into radio waves that travel around the world, well, travel around your local neighborhood. That's fine. If you turn this on without the antenna connected, then that 1 watt of power can't get out. It basically comes along, finds there's no antenna, and it goes back inside. And 1 watt of electrical power will heat up the very, very small, tiny, delicate components in there to the point where they fail almost immediately. So if you turn this on without a transmitter antenna on it, you've probably buggered it. It's probably stuffed. It's probably no good, throw it in the rubbish bin. So you've got to be really, really careful. Always have an antenna on there, which is why I think they're shipping these now with the antenna glued on, because too many people have sort of just taken them out of the box, wired it up to see if it worked, and that's it. She's toast because they didn't put the antenna on first. Always have an antenna on, and it must be a good antenna. If you have a bad antenna, for example, if the antenna was one of these horrible cheap things and it was cut to the wrong length, then sure, some of the power will come out here and go out the antenna, but some of it will still get bounced back because the antenna is not capable of soaking up all the power. This is the thing called the standing wave ratio. It gets all very technical, I won't go too far, but basically what it means is that the antenna is not tuned properly, so some of the power gets bounced back inside and this gets too hot again and then it cooks. And if it needs a fan to run normally, then with a bad antenna, it's just going to overheat and it's going to fail. So this is another reason why I think some people have said these have been unreliable, because they're using bad antennas. And the bad antennas, which are not properly tuned, push half the power back down into here and it all gets too hot and melts and stops working. So there you go. But those are the 3 options that I've got sitting here at the moment, and I will get a 400 milliwatt one and test it as well. Price, it varies. I mean, go to Hobby King, go to High Model, go to Fox Tech, whatever. You have a look on their price list, decide for yourself where you're going to buy one. They're all the same product. But I'd say start out with this. It's really cheap, it's light, it's simple, it works, it's robust, there's no fan to get broken, and physically it's a more robust product. Or of course you can always build the FPV backpack. There's a couple of videos on this channel showing you how to do that, and then you don't have to worry because it's got the little module in there, it takes care of everything for you. But the first thing to do when you get one of these, if you really want to have fun with FPV, is throw this damn antenna away, get yourself some clover-leaf antennas, make them yourself, there's a video on this channel, or just go out and buy some. Again, all the major hobby retailers are now selling these things, the online ones sell these clover-leafs. Piece of cake. Now, I mentioned with 2 types. Here's the other type of video transmitter on 5.8 gigahertz. These are the ones that carry the FatShark label. And these are, I think they're made by Immersion RC, I'm not sure. Yeah, Immersion RC. Look at the FatShark label. These are the ones that FatShark uses. Different frequencies to these ones. So you cannot use this transmitter with the receiver designed for the other transmitters. And likewise, you can't use these with a FatShark receiver, because here's a FatShark receiver here. This receiver will not receive the signal from this. Although they're both supposed to be 5.8 gigahertz, they're different channels within the same band. In fact, round about the same band. So you need to decide at the start, which way are you going? You're going to go with the FatSharks and the Immersion RC, or you're going to go with these ones, the SkyRF module and the different bands. Once you've made your mind up, it's a bit more difficult to change, because you can either change your transmitters or your receivers. Now here's a 600 milliwatt transmitter, and it's actually really small and quite light. So, but again, it comes with an antenna that's throw it away, because FatShark do have their own antennas. They have their Spyro antennas, which are clover-leaf. So if you're going to go, even if you're going with the FatShark, you can get yourself some of the circularly polarized antennas and throw them on. They have a different one. It comes in a little mushroom. I think you've seen it before on one of my videos. I don't have one laying around. I'm terribly sorry, but I will find one and show you later. So yeah, but there we go. This one here is 100 milliwatt. And I said power's not important, but 100, it's pretty marginal. You're not going to go far, especially because the original receivers like this one in the FatShark Immersion series are not very sensitive. These receivers are way more sensitive. So these will receive the same strength or receive a much weaker signal. So it gives you much more range, but of course you can't use these with these. So, you know, I think FatShark now, as I said in a video just a little while ago, FatShark have brought out a new range of receivers, which are much more sensitive, they tell me, so I'll try and get hold of some of those and test them out. If that's the case, then, you know, the FatShark will give you really good range. But as it stands, these, you're not going to fly out a visual range with that 100 milliwatt one and these receivers. It's just not going to happen. You're probably going to get, you know, 400 meters, 300 meters before it starts getting really snowy. So this would be good for a quadcopter floating around your backyard sort of thing, but not for any long range. The 600 milliwatt system, well, I've seen these used with these, and they give about the same range, maybe a little bit less than the 200 milliwatt with the SkyRF system, simply because the receiver for this is more sensitive. So you've got to be aware of that. But as I say, boils down to, is the new FatShark receiver as sensitive as they say? I will have to test it and find out. Don't have one, I'll have to order one, see what I can do. So that's basically the range of transmitters and receivers. Now, the other thing I mentioned briefly, you know, these antennas, these black ones, rubbish for the reasons I've stated. Not rubbish, they work, but they're really suboptimal, we might say. There are options, of course, because these are all what we call omnidirectional antennas. They all work creating a big bubble of electricity, a big bubble of radio signal, as I've spoken about in a previous video showing you how antenna gain works. Now, obviously on the transmitter, that's exactly what you want. You want that sort of sphere of energy around the model so that it doesn't matter which way it's facing, you're going to get a consistent signal. But on the receiver, on the ground end, on this end here, where we have the little receiver, we can do some clever, smart things by using antennas that don't have a spherical radiation pattern. We can use antennas with gain. Now, I'll put a link to the video that talks about gain and shows you how that works in the description on this video, so go and look at it. But suffice to say, it's something like this. This is the helical antenna from Circular Wireless, this one. And this actually provides a much stronger signal from the same transmitter when compared to this receiver antenna. So you can get much improved range using one of these antennas on the receiver only. You can't put this on your model because as soon as your model turned away, it would be pointing in the wrong direction. You get virtually nothing at all. So this is only for the receiver end, only for the ground end. And so if you're using these clover-leaf antennas, these circularly polarized antennas, and I don't know, they disappear. Here we go. If you're using one of these on your transmitter, this is omnidirectional, it's spherical radiation, then you can use one of these on your receiver, which is also circularly polarized. So you'll get nice strong connection between these two. If you've decided anyway to go with just the ordinary linear polarized antenna, then you can still get some gain. You can use one of these, this antenna. So this will work with that and increase the range. This will act like a high gain antenna. It is a high gain antenna, but you still have problems with the fact that, you know, these things, if you lay it down, it's not going to give you as much signal as if it's cross polarized with the receiver. So, you know, it's what we used to use a year and a half, 2 years ago to try and get range. These days, what we use is this, and it's just so much better in so many ways that, you know, really is worth doing that. But if you're getting started in FPV, if this is going to be your first FPV model, then, you know, something simple. These antennas will work, but you'll get dropouts when you do turns and things. So I'd say get yourself a simple, cheap, low power, say 200 milliwatts, 5.8 gig transmitter. Use one of these stock standard receivers if you like, but replace these whips, these antenna whips, with a set of circularly polarized antennas from wherever. Just get a good reliable set of these things and you'll be set. You shouldn't have any problems. This setup, as I say, with the circularly polarized antennas, it's good for a couple of kilometers. That's as far as you'll want to go in your initial FPV flights because you'll get lost otherwise. You'll lose you won't know where you're going and you won't know how to get home. Because when you're starting out, yeah, you can throw in on-screen displays and return to launch systems and everything, but when I started, I found I just threw it in my AXN and flew it, and it was great because I had little to lose. It was really simple. There was nothing much to go wrong. I didn't have to worry about flicking the wrong switch. I just flew it and landed it and flew it again. Simple as anything. Really, really straightforward. That's what you need to do to get your FPV going. And that's why 5.8 gig is so good, because it's cheap, it's simple, it's light, and it's really tough. Now, the other thing you need to know about 5.8 is that it's not legal everywhere. None of this video stuff is. It's all, quite often, to truly be legal, you've got to have a ham license or, You've got to use minuscule levels of power. So we have to realize that the stuff we're using quite often, it's not strictly legal. And so I can't possibly endorse the use of any of this stuff. But let's face it, people are going to use it. And people do use it. So looking at the legal ramifications, what you want is something that's not likely to cause interference to other services. And that's really the bottom line. If nobody knows you're using it and you don't cause any problems, you're not really going to get into trouble, are you? So that's where 5.8 gig wins again. The only other things that might be operating on 5.8 gig are some Wi-Fi systems, some weather radars. That's probably about it. And also, because 5.8 gigs is such a high frequency, it doesn't go through walls into buildings. So if someone's got an internal Wi-Fi system and you fly overhead, you're not going to cause any problems because the roof of the building will stop the signal. It'll stop your video signal getting in and their Wi-Fi signal getting out. So yeah, it's pretty good. And also, it doesn't travel far unless you're using a directional antenna to pick it up. And if you're using circular polarization, well, there's not many people using circularly polarized systems on 5.8 for anything other than FPV flying. So there you go. And if you're flying somewhere and there might be someone flying 3 or 4 miles down the road and they're on the same frequency as you running on 5.8 gigs, you won't interfere with each other. You'll be fine. There'll be no problems because the signal is absorbed by the environment so quickly that it doesn't carry far. But having said that, if you use the right antennas, use these high gain antennas and set things up properly, you can get 30, 40, 50 kilometers out of 5.8 gig if you want to. So it's the best of all worlds, really, in that respect. You can't fly behind trees. You can't fly behind buildings. You can't fly behind hills because this stuff is strictly line of sight. As soon as you can't see your model, you won't be able to receive the video in terms of if you fly, behind terrain. So you've got to be really careful with that. I've flown this in hilly environments, and you've got to be really willing to pull on the elevator as soon as you lose your video. If you duck behind a hill, pull on the elevator, climb back into clear air, and you'll pick the signal back up again. But don't think you're going to be following riverbeds for miles, through trees and that sort of stuff with this gear. You're just not. That's when you really do have to look at the lower frequencies, and possibly lower frequency for your radio too, because 2.4 gig doesn't really travel behind buildings through trees very well at range either. So that's it. Keep out of trouble. Use a frequency that not many other people are using, and a frequency that chances are, even if there is someone using it, they won't even know you're there. Makes it nice and simple. And keep your power levels low, because that, again, reduces the chances of upsetting somebody. We don't want to upset people. We want to get on with everybody, have a nice happy time and enjoy the hobby. So there you go. That's a little bit about 5.8 gigahertz video systems and why I like them so much and why I actually recommend them for people getting into FPV. If you're worried about the legal situation, check your own country's regulations. A lot of them allow 5.8, but a lot of them certainly don't allow things like 1 watt transmitters. So you've got to be careful and check around, see if there's anything that you might be interfering with before you fly. And always do, of course, your range check without being reliant on FPV. Put the goggles on someone else and you fly out as far as you can go to make sure you've got the range you're supposed to get. Because one thing with all these systems is you have a thing called phantom channels. So I can set my transmitter to channel 1 and perhaps my receiver gets accidentally set to channel 5 and I look on the ground, I've got a good signal, I fly 30 meters, the signal's gone. Because as I said, these receivers, they overlap a bit. They will pick up an adjacent channel. If you don't have them tuned to exactly the right channel, then you get a good signal while the model's close, but as soon as you go 30 or 40 meters, everything turns to snow. In fact, I have to confess I did this the other day. I set up with my FatSharks with the built-in receiver, tuned it in, thought that's a nice solid signal, good, put the goggles on, threw my AX in, and within about 4 seconds it flew out of video range. What do you do? Well, of course I tuned it very quickly and I managed to bring it down without breaking it, but that's only because I've flown the model so much that I sort of knew how much control to put in to fly it while I was blind, and I did manage to get little fragments of video. But if it was your first FPV flight, I think you'd probably find that you're taking home a big bag of broken. So that's it, enough talk for this video. Questions on the bottom, comments on the bottom as usual. If you like the video, if you think it was useful, then give it a thumbs up so that other people will notice it as well. And stay tuned because there's a lot more coming up on RC model reviews in the coming days, weeks and months. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.